In the days when there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. But God was preparing an eternal kingdom. From David's throne to the cross of Christ, the story of kingship unfolds and finds its fulfillment in Jesus Christ, the Anointed One. Through suffering and praise, the Psalms gives voice to the cries and the hopes of God's people. Join us as we trace the path of the true King and the glory of his coming reign. Hallelujah! Welcome to the Psalms of Ascent, everyone. My name is Javon Steffen, and I'm joined by Andy Stoller and Chet Bumgartner with Lisa Lehman as our sound engineer.
In our last episode, Steve, Joyce, and Janelle finished 1 Chronicles, tracking David's preparation for the temple worship and establishing Jerusalem. In next week's episode, we'll be moving into 2 Chronicles, where Solomon's reign and the temple dedication takes center stage.
But before we cross into that narrative, we pause our chronological journey through Israel's history and explore the past from a poetical perspective.
We sure do. We want to explore Psalms 120 through 134, or the 15 Psalms that we collectively call the Songs of Ascent, or in some translations, the Songs of Degrees. Now, as Javon will explain in a little bit, these songs poetically articulate several themes that form the foundation for Israel's identity and its allusions to the coming Messiah.
Now, to clarify, the authors who penned these psalms didn't intend for them to complement each other like they do in our Bible.
You're right. In fact, David apparently wrote 4 of these songs, and he lived and reigned roughly around 1000 BC to 960 BC. Meanwhile, we can reasonably conclude that God inspired at least one of the Psalms after the Jews returned from the Babylonian exile. So Psalm 116 specifically celebrates the end of the exile.
So wait a minute. Didn't the children of Israel return from exile in around 585 BC?
Correct. So basically, we don't know exactly, but these psalms could span about 425 years of Israel's history.
Wow, that is a huge time span. 425 years? Of course, this inspires the question, why do our Bibles combine them into the Psalms of Ascent? And who combined them, and when?
Those are all great questions. Unfortunately, history can't answer those definitively, but people have reached various conclusions.
Yeah, for instance, some people believe that the Jews or religious leaders sang these psalms on the steps of the temple, and these people base this off of text from the Mishnah.
Ooh, before you go further, can you help me understand what Mishnah means? I have never heard that word before, and probably a few of our listeners haven't either.
Sure. Well, the Mishnah basically collects rabbinical commentary on the Old Testament. Kind of think of it as an ancient study Bible, in a way. And it was written, again, some estimate around 200 AD, not BC, so this was after Jesus. And according to some, the Mishnah refers to the Psalms of Ascent and connects them to a ceremony in which people would ascend the 15 steps in the temple built after the exile.
And these steps led Jews up from the court of the women to the court of the men, is that right?
Yes.
But others believe that the Jews sang these 15 songs as they traveled into Jerusalem to begin celebrating one of the 3 feasts God established in Deuteronomy 16:16.
Yes, according to this conclusion, the Jews referred to Psalms 120 through 134 as the Psalms of Ascent because Jerusalem sat on a high hill, and people literally had to ascend into it as they approached the temple.
Yeah. So, to summarize so far, God inspired multiple people to write these psalms.
And at some point, someone or a group of people decided to sing them in a sequence.
Yes, and many believe that they combined them as part of their worship focused on the temple.
And that the temple was the second temple, or the one the Jews built after the exile, and the one Ezra chronicles in his book, meaning that most likely this tradition started sometime around 515 BC or after. But again, we can only speculate.
Yeah. Now, our fellow podcasters will more thoroughly explore the temples, and they already have talked about the tabernacle and the role of messianic foreshadowing. But this collection of psalms reminds us of Israel's unique calling from God and the religious fervor this calling inspired.
And these psalms also emphasize God's promise to give Israel a place and his promise to fill one corner of the earth with the power of his holy presence.
Yeah. The temple fulfills God's intentions for the tabernacle that he described to Moses in Exodus. Through the temple, God essentially established a throne and declared, "I dwell here." Yet, the tabernacle and temple both foreshadowed the Messiah, who came down from the New Jerusalem to the tabernacle with us and fill us with the Spirit.
And furthermore, someone or a group combined these at one point to provide a more comprehensive understanding of history. Yes, these people wanted their fellow Jews to see how God weaves individual moments of history into a larger narrative about his plan to bless the nations of the world. Amazing how the Psalms of Ascent fit into a bigger picture.
So these psalms within the Psalms are a little cluster found in Psalms 120 to 134. This is actually in the 5th book of Psalms. These 15 short psalms are loaded with poetic beauty. Why does the literary structure and style matter so much to this cluster of hymns in the 5th book of Psalms?
What strikes me immediately is their compactness. So most are only a few verses long, right? Almost like poetic snapshots. In Hebrew poetry, short form isn't a weakness, it's actually more precise. These psalms were built to be memorized, recited, and repeated on the road.
And another amazing literary structure that these psalms employ is a poetic technique called, quote, staircase parallelism.
Yeah, you mean like anadiplosis.
Oh, wait, and a what?
Well, to be honest, I had to look this up, and I found some information in the book called The Psalms, a Christ-centered commentary written by Christopher Ashe. Anadiplosis is a rhetorical device where a word or phrase at the end of a clause or sentence is repeated at the beginning of the next.
And this repetition really creates a sense of connection, and it emphasizes a particular idea or a train of thought.
Right. So a modern day example I'm going to pull from Star Wars, right? So Yoda tells Luke, fear leads to anger, and anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Not bad, but don't quit your day job.
Okay, sure.
Here in Psalm 121, we have this beautiful phrase, where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord.
So beyond this literary phrasing, what makes these Psalms of Ascent distinctive then?
There's actually several features. The first is parallelism, which is the backbone of Hebrew poetry. Psalm 121 is a great example of this, where it states, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The second line mirrors the first, and it doubles its impact.
And then there's repetition. Sorry. Again.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, thank you. Psalm 121, again, 6 times it uses the word keep. And that's not redundancy, it's reassurance. It drills the promise into the memory of a weary pilgrim.
Another device that the psalmists use is imagery from daily life. These aren't abstract concepts for the reciters of these hymns. The pilgrims on the journey saw hills, harvests, households. They saw city gates along the way. And those very things and images fill these psalms. Psalms 128 speaks of a fruitful vine and olive shoots around the table. Psalm 126 describes sowing in tears but reaping in joy.
So the imagery was literally drawn from what they experienced on the road.
Yeah, exactly. And Hebrew poetry often plays with sounds too, just like our poetry does. Psalm 126 moves from dream to laughter. And in the Hebrew, these words themselves echo the joy through their rhythm. The artistry isn't just what is said, but how it sounds.
Structurally, some psalms use inclusio. And now, Andy, I assume you had to look this one up because I don't know what it is.
Yep.
But inclusio, as from what you've taught me, is framing the poem with the same phrase at the beginning and end. The book of Ecclesiastes uses vanity of vanities as its inclusio. But this week, Psalm 129 does this with, quote, greatly have they afflicted me from my youth. That book ending reinforces endurance through hardship.
So as we explore the literary structure of these Psalms of Ascent, we've seen brevity, parallelism, repetition, imagery, sound play, and inclusio. Psalm 124 actually uses something we talked about a few seasons ago, the chiastic structure. This one's for you, Taylor. Shout out. Javon, have you seen any other patterns?
Well, yeah, actually. Some of the Ascent Psalms borrow from wisdom traditions. Psalm 127 begins, quote, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain, unquote. That sounds very close to Proverbs, showing how these songs pulled from Israel's wisdom stream.
Oh, interesting. And others echo lament traditions. Psalm 120 is basically a cry for rescue. Psalm 123 is a plea for mercy. And so the Ascent collection is kind of like a poetic sampler. Wisdom, lament, thanksgiving, all reshaped for the pilgrims on the road.
And that's what makes this little psalm book so incredibly versatile. They could be prayed by exiles longing for return. They could be recited by travelers heading to a feast at the temple in Jerusalem. And they can be recited by any of us believers facing the ups and downs of our journey with God.
Exactly. The artistry is the glue. It makes the theology singable, memorable, and experiential.
Amen. And that prepares us for what comes next. Not just how the Psalms were written, but why they were grouped together as songs of ascent in the first place.
As we read through these 15 chapters, I noticed a few recurring themes. Mount Zion was mentioned several times. When Israel journeyed up to Jerusalem, whether it was physically happening for a pilgrimage or a figurative outlook of singing the Psalms of Ascent, what did Zion represent for them? Why was Zion chosen as the center of everything?
Yeah, Zion wasn't the tallest mountain nor the most impressive by human standards. But for the pilgrim, Zion wasn't only the capital city, it was the dwelling place of God and the throne of David.
Right. Mount Zion was another name for Mount Moriah, right? Where the sacrifice of Abraham with Isaac took place?
Yeah, Javon, that's an interesting thought. This mountain had already been a special place for many years before this time.
And those tie-ins are what is so helpful in giving psalms like these a broader context. The Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7 also promised a king whose reign would endure, and Zion was a visible reminder of that promise. The Bible Project notes Zion became the symbolic overlap of heaven and earth, where covenant promises met historical reality.
So Zion was important for both geography and theology. The city's walls and mountains told a story. It was a place of rescue. Psalm 125 reads, "As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people." The place itself illustrated God's covenant faithfulness, which is why the people longed for Zion. But here's a question. Was Zion only about protection?
Psalm 133 actually answers that for us. How good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. So it was also about unity. The ascent wasn't a solo journey. It was a reunion under the rule of God's chosen king. Zion gathered the scattered tribes into one worshiping family. God had restored before, and he would restore again.
Which brings us to Christ. If Zion was the center of Israel's faith, how does Jesus fulfill it? Well, Hebrews 12:22 tells us believers have, quote, come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, end quote. The earthly city foreshadowed the heavenly reality. Jesus himself becomes the meeting place of God and his people.
It's amazing. Did you notice the peace theme throughout these chapters, and that was specifically pointed out in Psalm 122?
Yeah, you're right. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Peace be within your walls. Mm-hmm. Peace be within you.
Mm-hmm. Peace. Shalom meant wholeness and stability under God's rule. Zion was not only the place of worship, but the embodiment of covenant order and blessing.
And so as we near the end of this journey, where did these Psalms of Ascent lead us? Psalm 134 is the last of these pilgrimage psalms. The pilgrims arrive at the temple, blessing the Lord in his sanctuary. The Ark of the Covenant could finally come home here. Historically, this closed the pilgrimage. Symbolically, we can anticipate the greater Zion of Isaiah 9, 6-7, the heavenly Jerusalem where the covenant reaches its fulfillment.
So, placed between Chronicles, these Psalms of Ascent remind us that the temple was never merely a building. It was Zion, themes of God's dwelling place, his promise of reunion with his people, and his shalom, or peace. That's why this pause in the Psalms is so important as we transition from the tabernacle and ascend into the temple.
Christians often refer to exhilarating spiritual times as mountaintop experiences. I don't know if that cliche could summarize the exhilaration the Jews felt when they ascended Mount Zion toward the temple. But we hope that Psalms 120 through 134, the Psalms of Ascent, inspire you to draw nearer to the Messiah this week and seek higher ground. Thanks for listening.